America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every week, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about pop parenting. When I say popular parenting, I mean parenting in popular culture, especially Black culture, and it's for a lot of reasons. That's unfortunately where we get a lot, actually mostly unfortunately, where we get a lot of ideas about what proper parenting comes from, because the Black family was overdetermined prior to civil rights, and then with civil rights coming from that vacuum, we're just kind of thrown into the market. So the market teaches us how to parent, which is kind of a bad situation. So when people think about good parenting and bad parenting, it's not from actually like an autonomous perspective. It's from the perspective of market creation. So when people say like someone like Bill Cosby was a great parent because he was present, why would that be? Why is that your model of being a good parent? Bill Cosby, like as depicted and in real life, he didn't know his kid couldn't read until he was 14. Like, that's ridiculous. If you don't know that your kids can't read until they're 14, you've been screwing up, because you should have been working with them the whole time. You should have noticed at 6 that something is wrong, and not just send them off to some school and then they come back to you like frustrated, and then you yell at them and then send them back off to some school. No, you should have been working with them the whole time. It should not be a surprise. And this working with students as opposed to sending them to some institution, that is kind of an artifact of modernity that we don't actually think of as an artifact of modernity. We think of the better parent works hard, gets money, and then sends their kid to the better institution, and the institution teaches them. And then when that kid comes home from the institution, or if that kid runs afoul of the institution, then you give them a lecture and you tell them to do better, and it's the kid's fault. And then you send them to another institution, some sort of therapist or something like that, and they shove them through the pills. And then you send them back to the institution to hopefully fit in with the institution better after your lecture and shooting them with a pill. At no point in time did you actually work with the kid in the patient work of actually learning alongside them and learning with them and teaching them how to be. You expect the institution to do that work for you. And that's bad parenting. Unfortunately, that's a lot of bad parenting that you kind of taught was good parenting, because you have the money to send their kid to the fancy institution, and then you lecture them about how they didn't obey when they don't obey the institution, when what you needed the whole time was the patience and the wherewithal to work with your kid. And I'll tell you, and this is where, and you know, it's a little bit of a clickbait title, but it's actually where Beyonce gets it right. Beyonce took her daughter on tour with her, and she wasn't very good at the tour. At the beginning, wasn't that great of a dancer, but at the end of the tour, by the end of the tour, like the kid was a great dancer and fit in very well because of the work that Beyonce and, you know, the entourage was putting into her. But she didn't just she understood that was a part of parenting. You know, if you're Beyonce's kid, you'll get the reading and writing and all of that stuff. You can get private tutors to do that and bring it in. But bringing that kid on tour and working with them every day, that's good parenting. That's as good a parenting as it can look if you're Beyonce. Yeah, you bring your kid on tour, and she learns by doing with you. And this is why LeBron James, who, you know, I have some qualms with LeBron James, but it really is remarkable how much this guy does right. He taught Bronny basketball. And sure, I don't think necessarily that it's the most important thing that Beyonce's kid learns how to dance or that LeBron's kid learns the game of basketball, but I do think part of parenting is working with your kid and making them excellent at something. And if they chose the thing that they do, that's fine. That's actually great. What always annoyed me about, for example, the Huxtables as the model Black family, and actually it was the model commercial family, because they were wealthy professionals. We overlooked the fact that they didn't actually work with the kids. They sent their kids off to institutions. When the kids would run afoul of those institutions, the kid would come back and then they would lecture them about the mistake. They never actually worked with the kid. And honestly, I always said if Heathcliff lost his job or lost a practice somehow, Claire would be a model of someone who would just find a reason to leave Heathcliff. That was always kind of a modern liberal marriage. In my mind, in modern liberal family, it was held together by money, and we just ignored it because they were professionals. wealthy professionals, but they didn't actually work with the kids in the day by day. Like Will, nor Carlton, nor what was the daughter's name? Not Tatiana Ali, the wonderful one. Ashley, the other Hillary, in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. None of them were being set up to be a judge. Uncle Phil wasn't working with them to be a judge. And you could say, well, that's not depicted in a sitcom or in television. No, Ben Cartwright was training his boys to take over the family. There was concerted effort. Ben Cartwright was training his boys to take over the ranch. Opie was training to be the future sheriff. That was real fatherhood, where like Andy would walk Opie through what it meant to be a sheriff, where Ben Cartwright was working side by side with the Cartwright boys on what it meant to run a ranch in a way that Uncle Phil never did with Will. Will wasn't on his way to be a lawyer, because in the liberal imagination, well, we just want to train them to be able to be what they want to be. No, it needs to be more particular than that. Good parenting is more particular than that. Phil should have been working LSAT programs. First of all, you screwed up when you have a daughter like Hillary. She was awful. She was awful. And so she was awful because you sent her to these schools that made commercial products, and she ended up being a vacuous commercial product. And you didn't actually work with her to become a Supreme Court justice. Like, you weren't working with Hillary, so Hillary was awful, and you were a failure as a parent. You weren't working with Carlton, so Carlton was Carlton. Carlton, you sent him to a bougie private school, and it turns out he turned out to be that kid. You weren't working with him to be a better judge. You weren't working with him to be a Thurgood Marshall. You weren't working with him. And Bill Cosby wasn't working with his kids, or he would have known by 6 or 7 that Theo was not the same as Denise or Sandra. Right? You never saw them working with him, because that in the modern imagination, everyone's specialized. And parents, they don't actually have to do the job of parenting, because there's no kind of conception of parenting in the modern world, because it's about civil society and these volunteer jobs we do for society, right? So we thought that Heathcliff and Claire were professionals because they made a lot of money, they were in honored professions, and they spent time with their kids. But they didn't spend meaningful work. They weren't really preparing their kids for self-determination in this world, which is why so many of the kids were kind of wastrels. Sandra was going on autopilot for a while, and then, Denise ended up having to get hitched to a military person. Vanessa was all over the place. I think she ended up with a janitor at some point in time, and then had to drop it. And it's all because they had bad childhoods, just not in an obvious way, and because the parents didn't actually parent the kids. They didn't actually work with the kids, making them excellent at some sort of meaningful venture. They sent them to institutions, very nice institutions, and expected the institutions to do the work. And then the show was about when those kids would come home from the institutions, having run afoul of those institutions, and then they would get a lecture. There was no steady work with them. And that is, like I said, you can contrast that with Opie and Andy in the Andy Griffin Show. You can contrast that with the Cartwrights in Bonanza. You can contrast Beyonce sending her kid off to Spence or the best little girls' school in New York, versus taking her on tour and working with her for her to become, an entertainer in that way. And I think Beyonce gives you a different model of what real parenting looks like, that granular effort. And LeBron admits that he wasn't there all the time when Bronny was young. But I honestly suspect that if LeBron had to do it again, he would have tried to figure out a way to spend more time with Bronny when Bronny was young, so Bronny would be better now. But I think LeBron in general understands what real parenting is in a way that's not depicted in media. And, I think we don't understand the work of parenting in an important way. And we start over, and someone says that the Black community would would benefit from generational knowledge and being passed over from generations. But this is kind of by design, because we have to understand that Jim Crow overdetermined the black family. The black family was what it was because of white terrorism. And I'll do a different show. On that. But we only did like 13 things before 1975. Like there wasn't a diversity of careers for black people. We were allowed to do like 13 things. Antonio Moore talks about this. And one of those things was look after white kids. And when you were looking after white kids, who was taking care of your kids? Who was working with your kids? And so we have to actually think about what that means for black people. And so Jim Crow overdetermined black life in a way that was unbecoming. And so after that, in the post 65, when baby boomers became parents, they didn't actually know how to. They didn't know how to do a lot of other things that they wanted to train their kids to do. So the wealthy ones did what Uncle Phil did and did what you saw depicted on Cosby. They sent them to institutions out there to teach your kid the profession that you didn't actually learn yourself. And it was supported by the culture, because the modern culture is about the division of labor and specialization. So if you can't teach your kids something, you send them to someplace else where they learn it, and then that's fine. And your job is to make money in the thing that you do so that you can pay some other institution to teach your kid. But that's not how real parenting works. And you can't be surprised when your kid then gets beaten by some other kid who actually learned an appropriate way in the cauldron of the family how to be excellent, because the parent worked that way. I think I want my kids to make a lot of money in their 20s, from like 25 to 35. And then either you make it when you're 35 and you can just retire and raise your kids intensely, not necessarily homeschool, just like intensely raise your kids, or move someplace cheaper. Because this idea that you make money to pay somebody else, pay some other institution, especially for black kids, to raise your kids, and then you only have enough time to fight with your kids when they run afoul of the institution, that's just not working. And I'm just not convinced that that's how you win. Right? And I'm not saying that you necessarily need to homeschool your kids and all the things. No, but you need to mind them. You need to have the time and the bandwidth to work with them. And work with them to become excellent at something. So I'm thinking, make all your money between 25 and 35 and then move someplace cheap with just enough cultural infrastructure to sustain you, so that you could spend the rest of your time working on your kids. Or get a job where you have the time to work with your kids. Because at the end of the day, if you're working all your money, if you're making all of this money to send your kids to the fanciest things, and that's just not working for them, like that's just not the right use of your life. Like a lot of people with good jobs and a lot of money have screw up kids. And I think they would rather sacrifice their jobs, their money, for like having a better kid. And you could have had a better kid if you just worked with the kid, as opposed to sending them to a fancy institution and assume that the institution is going to do the job. Because the institution's not going to do the job. You need to work with your kid, especially your black kid. Because no institution in America is really committed to making your kid excellent. By the way, if you appreciate what I'm doing, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com. I think it's important because I think the black family is a critical institution that's been undermined since black people have been in the United States. And I'm trying to give you a quality of wisdom that you're not going to get by watching the Cosbys, that's for sure. They'll just tell you to go work a lot, make money, send your kid to a fancy school, and then you'll be winning because of the fancy school, and then you'll end up yelling at your kid when they run afoul of that institution. I actually think that you should spend time with your kids. You should need to coach that team. You need to, like, YouTube has a lot of, there's a lot of insight to be gained from YouTube about how to become a good, volunteer soccer coach, volunteer baseball coach, or whatever. Be there with your kid and work through it, and not just send them to some institution that's going to be indifferent to